So I saw this mashup opportunity, this being creative, this music background actually enabled me to see how to drive innovation from a tech transfer perspective.
Welcome to the Transfer Files, inside the world of federal innovation. This is your insider's look at how federal laboratories bring groundbreaking technologies to market. I'm your host, Andrea Nelson. In every episode, we'll bring you insights and expertise from throughout the world of tech transfer. Our guest today is Dr. Paul Campbell, co-founder and managing partner at Brown Venture Group, a venture capital firm for Black, Latino, and Indigenous tech startups. Paul has an impressive background in music, tech and telecom sales, and as a serial entrepreneur. Paul and I talk a lot about the NASA Inclusive Innovation Mashup Lab, an initiative brought to life by Brown Venture Capital and NASA. The Innovation Mashup Lab is meant to empower underrepresented entrepreneurs and contributors to find opportunities through federal tech transfer. Let's dive in. Dr. Paul Campbell, thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So first off, I want to start with your background so we get a little context for where you are today. So you started in telecommunications, sales, and media. Tell me more about that. Actually,
I started in entrepreneurship years ago. I had started my first company in Virginia Beach, Virginia, where I grew up at. My dad had joined the military. I was born in Minnesota, where I live now. And they said you can go anywhere in the world you wanted to. So we said, how about Hawaii? They said, how about Norfolk? So I grew up in Virginia Beach, had a background in music production, started my first record company when I was 17 years old. And at the time, you had artists like Master P and you had Timberland, and these guys were coming up. So everybody knew each other in terms of the production scene there. But it really got my entrepreneur flair there. But I'd never heard about tech transfer. I'd never heard about venture capital. It wasn't until later on until I got into the telecom industry and I saw the iPhone launch and I saw that there was this thing called Y Combinator and Techstars that was funding these startups. I'm like, what is venture capital? And that's when I kind of got the bug. I'm like, if I ever saw an opportunity like that again, I'll make sure to recognize it. So my background has been varied and provides different lens. I've worked for nonprofits. I also traveled around the world and saw the need for economic and human flourishing solutions that people don't normally think about. And so that kind of my why behind the work that I do is not just money per se, but also how to increase economic and human flourishing.
Excellent. And let's talk a little bit more about that music background, which is probably unique in our community. So how does that play in now?
You know, that's very interesting because as a musician, creative, you're not thinking linearly. Like you don't have that A to B. You have very abstract. You kind of do that jazz band thing where you're filling off of people and things like that. But as you begin to look at innovation as a whole, you realize that innovation, if you break it down to its core elements, is a blending of different ideas. And so I call that mashups, you know, in the music business. So you would sample a song from a symphony, you would add some kicks and snares, things like that. And all of a sudden you had a new song altogether. Well, that actually happens in life as well. And so many innovators are not aware that they're doing this, but basically nobody is successful on their own. And it takes a whole village to actually bring ideas to market. But case in point, when an entrepreneur is trying to solve a problem, a lot of times they're going through this innovation process and they're trying to figure out, is this problem big enough for me to solve? We'll have a customer at the other end, but it's a pain point essentially. So I give the example of a mashup lab, the inventor of the printing press, Gutenberg. Mm-hmm. So Gutenberg was trying to solve a problem with literacy. And back at the time, the only way you can actually get books into your hands is if you had a scribe. And it was not a very effective, and you had to pay the scribe to do that. So he wanted to make sure people had more access to research and material. So he saw that there was woodblock printing existed. Ink was invented by the Chinese. You had movable typesets, and he was in wine country trying to solve this problem as an entrepreneur. And then he realized, the wine press. So that wine press became, added to those different technologies that mashed them up together, which created the printing of books, what's actually led to Leonardo da Vinci later on having access to books, multiple books, because of this technology. And of course, Leonardo da Vinci was a super innovator himself. And so me being exposed to the federal labs, I knew how important this was because, again, these are different contributors from different walks of life all across the country who are working on problems that no one else knows they're trying to solve. And then you bring in the entrepreneur who has access to this technology or this opportunity, who can say, oh, I could see a purpose for this and I can license it. So I saw this mashup opportunity, this being creative, this music background actually enabled me to see how to drive innovation, from a tech transfer perspective.
And I think it's safe to say that from the time that Gutenberg was putting those pieces together, innovators and entrepreneurs now have a lot more ingredients to work with.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you deal with all that noise or just sift through that mass volume of technologies and pieces to come up with something cohesive?
Yeah, that actually led me to study behavior economics, which is a great tool to figure out how to take complex ideas and lots of noise to whittle it down to something. One of the early behavior economists who came out said people love options, but they hate making choices. And what's interesting is that when you present people, it's counterintuitive to think I shouldn't give people that many choices. I should narrow it down because you think, oh, they'll buy more. But they did a study where one group of entrepreneurs were selling soap, and they had like 40 different ones to choose from, and the other one was selling 8, and they put them next to each other. The one that had 8 actually sold more than the one that had 40, because what's happening is cognitively, people were given information overload, and they were shutting down, and they were walking away because they couldn't make that decision. So the whole idea of how do you deal with complexity? And you want to, maybe you're thinking as a tech transfer professional, I'm going to give them everything. Your job really is to ask really informative questions to the entrepreneur so that you can whittle it down to a manageable set of opportunities that they can take a look at, and then they can say, oh, I can see myself doing that, bringing that to market. Mm-hmm. And so really having that discipline of whittling down, and it's actually helpful to actually increase how many licenses a year you actually can go for.
And the tough thing, I would imagine, with whittling down is you have to make sure that you're whittling the right things, that you're not dropping off things that would have been valuable and leaving things that are not going to come to anything. So mm-hmm. What have you learned about how to do that effectively?
Yeah. So about 3 years ago, Harvey from NASA Glenn Research Center and his team reached out to local folks in Minnesota. Up until that point, I had never heard of a tech transfer office. I knew tech transfer offices existed from the colleges, but I didn't know that they originally started it from the federal perspective. So as he was reaching out, I was like, okay, what does this person need? As an entrepreneur, I'm always trying to figure out who is my customer. If you think of the entrepreneur as your customer, you're going to take more time to figure out what are their pain points, what can't they see now that you, with your knowledge that you have, and how can you ask really thoughtful questions? But you can't do that if you're only thinking about yourself. So you have to put yourself in their shoes. So when they came through, I told everybody in Minnesota that when first of all, they came through to talk to multiple people. No one understood what to do with them because they were trying to figure out what can I get from NASA, not what can give from NASA. So after I heard that they were interested coming in, I jumped on a phone call with Priscilla, who was at the time working on his team. And she said, this is, we're trying to figure out these ecosystems. This is a T2 initiative. We're trying to get more technology commercialization outside of just, the East Coast and West Coast and more into like the Midwest area. And so I said, well, what else do you need? Like what other people, who do you need to talk to? And by identifying who those people were, it formed the first part of how do you whittle down those technologies. So we started talking to different industry folks and said, hey, come to learn from, what tech transfer is all about. And so we had them come in and do a 2-day tour type of thing. The first day they met with 18 different leaders that were from the Twin Cities area. And nobody, we all sat down at a table and we broke bread. Nobody said their title, but halfway through they said, hey, the first person stood up and said, hey, I'm Mayor Melvin Carter of St. Paul. Hey, I'm, Chris Latandris from Hennepin County Commissioner. Hey, I'm, so-and-so from Best Buy and University of Minnesota. Every person that the tech transfer professional needed to talk to was in that room, essentially. Then the following night, we had a bunch of different entrepreneurs that had never heard about tech transfer, but just kind of got introduced as I got introduced. And they said, we needed 3 people to say, what would we do if we were able to license a technology from NASA? So Harvey and his team came in, they explained to this group of entrepreneurs what the technology commercialization process was. Now you can imagine it's the first time that they heard about this. When you're in this field, you don't think, oh, I do this every day, nobody cares. Imagine it's the first time someone told you that there was this platform that can literally lead to generational wealth, right here, and you're bringing this to them. So it can get mundane if you're doing the day-to-day task and going through the process of the commercialization process. But at the other end is an entrepreneur that can actually create jobs, from that standpoint of view. So after I told everybody who came to the day before, I said, our only goal is to get NASA to want to come back. That's our only goal, not to tell them all the different wonderful things. And so I said, we're going to land relationally, and then we're going to expand strategically to figure out our customer, the tech transfer office, essentially. So by doing that over the next couple of years, we then we co-created this initiative called, because of my music background, I had to infuse it there. It was called NASA's Inclusive Innovation Mashup Lab. And what we did was we knew that there was 2 different initiatives that were going on in our ecosystem that had high probability. One of them was Minnesota MedTech 3.0, and it was focusing on medical technologies. And the other one was a SAF project, a Sustainable Aviation Fuel project. Both obviously that NASA can actually touch because of the technologies it had. So the team at NASA Glenn co-created this opportunity with us and helped whittle down using those 2 filters of the medical side and the sustainable aviation fuel side. Then we took that first path and went to industry leaders like Medtronic and Boston Scientific and others and said, if we were to license this technology, would you consider them as part of your supply chain, or would you consider them, eventually to acquire them if they became a company? And they said yes or no. And then we used that list to then bring it down to these entrepreneurs, which then we had to get a couple of different type of entrepreneurs. One was the technical expert, which they can talk about the technologies. And one was the entrepreneur. A lot of times when you're working with technology people, they love the technology, how it works, but they don't love the problem that it solves. And so you have to get them to be more entrepreneurial that way. And entrepreneurs are trying to sell. They're not thinking about feasibility studies and things like that. So you had to balance out those 2 different groups. So we were able to use this inclusive innovation mashup model by doing a technology pool strategy as a technology push, because what you're not thinking about is all the noise that happens to the entrepreneurs or the big corporations. And you're like, why don't they see how awesome this technology is? But it's not until you think about them as your customer and where they're at in their maturation of understanding of this thing. Like, what is it? So a friend of mine from the city of St. Paul, her name is Mary Rick. I was talking to her for years about this, and she gave me a good analogy that I now use myself of a library. She said, imagine you had this big, huge library full of books, and you're trying to figure out, where do I start? You needed a librarian, and these technology commercialization specialists actually are like the librarian that can help you figure out what that technology is based upon what you're trying to get done.
Wow, that's a great analogy. Well, and it's a big job.
Yeah.
Big responsibility, big job for that librarian, we'll say. So as the NASA Inclusive Innovation Mashup has been getting on its feet, where are things going from here?
It takes a while for entrepreneurs to develop technologies. And a lot of times, many entrepreneurs are very impatient. They want things to happen like yesterday. But the commercialization process, you have to set the right expectations very early on. This is the beginning of a journey. You're going to fall. You're going to get back up. You're going to like, what am I doing? You're going to feel like the imposter syndrome. Here I am using this technology and I don't really belong here, whatever it is. But you really have to have that continuous learning process. So we knew that after the entrepreneur is done with their journey from the Mashup Lab perspective, they're kind of just beginning their journey, in terms of, now that I'm done with this, I know how to license a technology. Because what we did was, we paired the commercialization process that NASA uses with the discipline entrepreneurship curriculum that MIT has, and we made sure that each one of those milestones aligned with what you have to do to actually license the technology. So out of the 5 technologies that we put through our program, 4 of them of the groups had indicated that they wanted to license the technology afterwards, which is a huge rate in terms of that. The reason why that works is because we knew that we had industry pool as part of that. So after they go through the Mashup lab, then they're prepared to then have a conversation with investors like myself, because that's what I do for my day job. Is I run a venture capital firm in Minnesota. And what this does, and what many of the tech transfer professionals aren't thinking about, is how does this de-risk the entrepreneur for the investor? Well, I know that because I am an investor. And also another thing too is most of the communities that I serve, because we focus on underserved communities that typically are underrepresented, is they're not from the traditional pools of capital or groups that have generational wealth. So what happens is many people that have great ideas, it's not that they don't have parents that didn't believe in them, but they don't get friends and family rounds of investment. We jokingly say, when our people die in our community, we don't get a will, we get a bill, and that's true for a lot of underrepresented, whomever your ethnic background. But the thing is, this model of licensing a technology from a federal lab actually, and then through our partnerships we have with the USPTO, there's a pro bono advisory council that I sit on the board of, and they offer up to $10,000 of IP assistance for entrepreneurs. By educating these entrepreneurs on how licensing these commercial products can actually benefit them to get funding, their eyes go like, oh, we didn't know. So for example, in tribal communities, many times these contributors do not own the land they're on. And so by licensing technology through the federal labs, and then by putting their ideas on top of that, they can actually take this technology and leverage it as collateral, because it's intellectual property. So if you can't do that for your own property that you live on, it's a way for people to start doing job creation and things of that nature. So you ask the question, where do they go after they're done with the Mashup lab? Well, now they're prepared to be investor ready for early stage investors. Now, because we have the technology pool strategy, and we're getting feedback from industry, the industry people know this technology now exists in our ecosystem and it's coming through this lab. And now we have a potential to work with other investors to come alongside this and then grow with the opportunity. Now, what these big corporations who are publicly traded companies, they have quarterly earnings. They have to make sure they figure out how to, make sure that it looks good on Wall Street. But they can augment their R&D spend by investing into these entrepreneurs who already licensed the technology from, one of the federal labs. And then now they've been de-risked, they've been invested, they're able to grow and get the capital that they need. And they can then, most people don't know about SBIR, STTR. And so all these entrepreneurs get exposed to this. And what we did at the back of just a little bit is we let them know along the different stages, different types of capital stacks that they can use. So in addition to SBIR, STTR, there's also how do you set yourself for congressional appropriations, and that whole arm. And then how do you see yourself being acquired by these corporations? You have to make sure you make yourself ready to be acquired. We had our friends from the Department of Commerce, International Trade says, when you're thinking about international business, this is what you got to think about. So most of these entrepreneurs are now ready for investment after they're done. And then it takes a couple more years before they can really start to see even a customer, from that standpoint of view. So I'm sorry for that long-winded answer, but it's a process that you think of what's the alternative. If you go right now as a person of color or an underrepresented community and try to go to a community that already has lots of resources, they're going to look at you like, well, you're too risky. So this helps you to become de-risked. And it also helps you bypass both gender and racial discounting that happens in the investment process. Because when we first started our fund, Brown Venture Group, we focused on what if we have all this talent that's out there, how come they're not getting investments? It turns out because the biggest problem they had was a relationship gap. Is that many community members were separated at birth because of redlining and other things that occurred in our economy. And now they couldn't cognitively think of somebody to invest in because they didn't have any relationship. Mm-hmm. So by having a federal lab technology like from NASA or NIH or NSA, it helps to de-risk them because they can actually stay long enough to say, this is my idea. So I'll stop there. I'm sorry.
No, that's excellent. And it from what I can see, you're bridging these gaps mm-hmm. that are not only bridges for those individual innovators and entrepreneurs, but people will continue crossing those bridges because then that web of connection and relationships and awareness mm-hmm. continues to grow. Mm-hmm. So a few years down the road,
I'm excited, not only the products that are going to come out of these, but and the customers, but also just the exponential sort of ripple effect of that.
Mm-hmm. The work that the technology commercialization professional does seems sometimes to get frustrating. Like, why? Where's my why behind it? You don't oftentimes get a chance to see the entrepreneur go all the way through and go the ups and downs to actually have the products that get sold. So maybe you switch positions and you don't get to do that, but really being able to remind yourself that the work that you do every day is transformational. It's going to lead to generational wealth, and people, your job is to try to figure out how can I make this easier for them to understand. And so sometimes it's speaking different language that you're not normally used to speaking, because you're in the government using all the different acronyms. Mm-hmm. But really it's figuring out how can you rephrase what is it you're doing to people that are at different walks of life, because your objective is to actually make sure you get this technology out there. So I would say, that whole idea of making it easier, I'll reiterate, is so important that you can de-risk entrepreneurs by this, making sure that you actually can make the decision easier. So less is more. But you have to make sure you think of them like your customer, where you're figuring out what are their needs, what are their challenges they're having, what can this technology do? Maybe they thought they're going to start with one technology, but it actually went up to something else because you were able to do more open-ended, probing questions. So really think about the value that you're creating for that entrepreneur. And then, from that standpoint of view, I think you'll see more success. So.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Paul Campbell, thank you so much for being here and sharing your insights.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
I'm happy to share that the Innovation Mashup Lab is growing. The next one will involve the National Security Agency, National Institutes of Health, and the Department of Energy. For more information about Paul, the Innovation Mashup Labs, Brown Venture Capital, and more, check the resources linked on the page for this episode. And you can find that on the FLC website, federallabs.org. Thanks for listening. We'll see you back in 2 weeks on Transfer Files Tuesday.
Thanks for tuning in to the Transfer Files, your insider's look at federal tech transfer. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay connected for more episodes exploring how hundreds of government laboratories and countless industry partners are driving innovations that shape our lives.